Let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat. We have a
This is so
We
awesome.
are an open culture that believes
It's actually
in
a big piece
What
of
is that process that a developer, or let's say a
As the
developer,
Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Administrator Office Hours live stream. Something's different today.
Yeah, your background's different. What's going on there?
Something feels off. So yeah, I'm at VMware Explore. I didn't know I was coming until about 3 weeks ago, and it was one of those like, hey, you're going to go represent OpenShift, and you're going to be the in the booth expert. So it's 8 a.m. Pacific time. The conference happens to be in San Francisco this year, and I'm in the booth. So yeah,
Nice.
It's quite the experience here after 3 years of being away, or yeah, it has been 3 years, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something. But yeah, in honor or recognition of being here at VMware Explore. So one, being on the expo floor, it is pre-opening time. So apologies to the audience if you start to hear vacuuming or there's lots of chatter and other stuff going around, because I can't keep people out of the expo floor, but we'll do our best there. And also, I am sitting on a terrible acrylic stool, so hopefully it doesn't injure me or something like that. But yeah, I'm excited about this episode because it's something that I say I'm excited about every episode, don't I?
But they're all good, so yeah, it's
right.
Okay.
It's very kind of you as the co-host. So yeah, I'm excited today because we want to talk about VMware, of course. VMware is always a big topic here on the stream because a lot of folks use OpenShift on VMware. And today we want to talk about two separate things. So one is what's new or what's changed with OpenShift on VMware with 4.11. And two, so for anybody who is at VMware Explore today, you can come to the booth. I don't remember what time. I should probably know that. But I'm doing a mini theater session here directly behind me. It's actually literally right there, on OpenShift on VMware best practices. So congrats to the live stream audience. You're my dry run. We're going to be testing this thing out and seeing how it goes. So yeah, maybe we'll learn something along the way, right?
That's right. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we can kind of kick off and roll along here. So I think I forgot to introduce myself. I am Andrew Sullivan, part of the Hybrid Platforms business unit, specializing in OpenShift, and I am co-host of the live stream with Johnny Rickard. So, Johnny, if you want to say hi, and I feel like we've already been chatting, right? 80 episodes in.
I know. Oh, by the way, this is 80 episodes, so this is pretty awesome. So congratulations. But yeah, I'm Johnny. I'm a special projects engineer at Red Hat over in the engineering group, and I was in consulting, and I was an architect for a while at Red Hat before I moved over. So yeah, always excited to be here. Like, these things are, I love doing this stuff, especially when we get a lot of chat coming in and we can interact with the crowd.
Yeah. So good reminder. So this is an office hours an office hours live stream with Red Hat live streaming. So what that means is we're here to answer your questions, whatever it is that's on your mind, whatever you want to talk about, chat about. By all means, send it in. We'll do our best to answer those questions. Have a conversation about it here on the live stream. If we don't know the answer, and let's be honest, Johnny and I don't know everything, even though sometimes we pretend like we do. We'll follow up, right? We can always follow up next week on one of the streams. We can follow up on social media, any of those things. If you're not watching us live, if you're watching a recording of this particular live stream, you can reach us via social media. So I'm at Practical Andrew on Twitter and Reddit and all the places, or you can reach me at andrew.sullivan@redhat.com if you prefer email. Johnny, I'll toss you under that bus too. Johnny, JONNY at redhat.com, or JRockTX1 on social media. So as is tradition, the first thing that we'll do is cover top of mind topics. I was saying just before we started here, I haven't even looked at the list this week because I've been doing this, right? So,
Oh yeah.
Johnny, please.
Yep, I got you. So it's actually been pretty quiet for the most part, but one of the first ones is like this is the 80th episode that we've done asking OpenShift Admin. So pretty cool milestone. We got 20 more before we hit the big 100. I'm also wearing my cool new swag.
Very
So
nice.
if you are interested, you can go to the Red Hat Cool Stuff store and then look under OpenShift or look under collections and then OpenShift, and then you can find the swag there. And Kubernetes 1.25 released last week. I think it released the morning of our last episode, but I didn't realize it was already out yet. So there's a bunch of cool things coming out. They have finally, I say finally, but they are actually removing the pod security policy from Kubernetes in 125 and in favor of the pod security admission. So we will have some more information on that eventually. We're doing a bunch of internal conversations to make sure that we get the messaging right, and we'll let you know how that's going to affect you in OpenShift. Also, last week, ODF 4.11 was released, so that's a pretty big milestone for those guys. So congratulations to the team. And then, if you are looking for just like a really quick, succinct synopsis of like what's coming out in 4.11, there's a nice blog online that was put together that you can go and look at, and it just gives you a nice just bullet format with links of some of the big release features that were coming out. So go ahead and check that out. And the last one is VMware Explore. That's Andrew's there this week, showing off. So like he'll get to have some fun with that. I'm glad that he's actually there, getting to interact with people and do the whole conference thing again. That's pretty awesome. So congratulations.
Yeah, it's I don't, I've been a vendor for a while now. 2013, I think, was when I moved over to tech marketing and all that. And I've always specialized on virtualization. So I've been to a number of VMworlds, what is now VMware Explore, and this one's different because everybody's been gone for so long, right? Nobody's been here, so there's just a lot of excitement. There's a lot of happiness to be out and about and in the world, and it's see people you haven't seen in a while. And this conference is always near and dear to my heart because usually there's a lot of people who come back year to year, so you see the same folks, the same administrators, the same developers, the same folks who want to come by and stop by and see what we're giving away each year, stuff like that. Speaking of which, we have some cups here in the booth, so hopefully I'll be giving those out today. I've been giving them out here and there, but yeah. So if you go, you were talking about swag. If you go in the Cool Stuff store, there's coffee mugs as well as the T-shirts.
Yep, and they're awesome. They're like the cool little camper mugs, so like they won't break, but they're nice. They're nice.
Yeah. So yeah, I got the package of mine is at home. It arrived after I left to come here. So
naturally.
I can't wear it. Yeah.
So just a quick question about the conference. Like with all the people coming back, so I did the open source summit, and that was my first conference that I've been to as a Red Hatter. And you can just feel like the electricity. So I imagine it's probably pretty similar there, right? With all the different people kind of getting back out, seeing each other again, all the new stuff that's kind of going on. Is there like this like, nerd vibe going on where everybody's just kind of like poking in and trying to figure out what everybody's talking about and doing?
There is, right? Because this conference historically has been pretty infrastructure centric, right? It's VMware, and VMware is changing their messaging. They come out with a lot of things. Anybody who watched the keynote yesterday, OpenShift was mentioned in the keynote, which is pretty awesome. So Andrew application platform now runs on OpenShift. They're changing their story, and I think a lot of the attendees here, a lot of the conversations that I've had with folks are around exactly that, evolving to picking up on VMware's message, which is very similar to Red Hat's message, right? The whole multi-cloud, hybrid clouds, how do we manage applications, and less about infrastructure. And the biggest booths here at the show are AWS, Microsoft's, Google, IBM, right? Everybody representing their cloud. So that's super interesting to me. We're getting away from, now it's out on the periphery where all the old hardware vendors, I say old, most of them are 15 or 20 years old, so they're not old, but it's not quite so hardware centric. I only see like 4 booths that have a rack of something in their It used to be every single
Right.
one. If you sold hardware, you had a rack of hardware in your booth.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That is awesome. That's a cool evolution to see, especially like you being there like year over year for so long, and you've kind of seen that transition. That's pretty cool to see.
yeah. My first one was 2008. As I was a customer, so came out and drank the Kool-Aid and all that other stuff.
Nice.
Let's see, Peter, off topic. Is there a way to make a 3.11 registry highly available to protect against storage array outage? Maybe. I'll be honest. I don't know a lot about 3.11 anymore. I'll also point out that we don't have an off topic. You can talk about whatever you want. You can ask us about whatever you want. We don't mind. Johnny, do you?
I think if we're talking about the internal registry, I think you can do an S3 backed storage and then use the just scale it, have it scaled to 2 or 3 or whatever. But if you're using like your regular, Docker registry or now I can't even remember what it's called, but like a registry container or something like that, the Docker registry service, then yeah, you can back it with S3, and then that would provide you with the storage backend, and then essentially if the pod dies, it'll spin up back up and then connect to that storage again. And then I think in 3, if you had it backed by Gluster, then there was that capability there as well. It's as long as your storage is. I think it had to be read write mini, so I would just have to go back and confirm. But I think it's doable. You just have to tweak some things.
Yeah, OpenShift 4, it's easy, right? Quote unquote easy, right? Again, make sure you have RWX storage or preferably object storage, and then you tell it to scale to however many instances. But at a minimum, so long as you're using, basically, if it fails, it should restart the pod and remount everything. Not worried about the pod, more worried about the PV storage backend. Yeah. For better or for worse, Kubernetes and therefore OpenShift kind of offloads or ignores all of those things and pushes it over to the storage device. I think that's one of the reasons why object storage is frequently the strong recommendation for registry storage.
Yep.
One, it's a protected storage, or it's hopefully a protected storage. But 2, it also enables scale. Right? We can have 5 or 10 or 50 instances of the registry if we need to.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think as long as it's like I said RWX, I was thinking NFS for some reason, but yeah, you don't want NFS. But if it's object store, then you should be fine as long as obviously the object storage is outside of your cluster, or it's like that's actually in an HA configuration, like an old cluster config or something like that.
Yeah. If you're using like a traditional storage array or something like that, you can basically back up that storage device. You can and protect it using whatever mechanism your storage array does. And if it fails, if something happens, you just restore it as is. The registry will read all the metadata and everything off of it and basically reconstruct itself. So everything it needs is in there, so you can protect it that way.
Yep. Oh, it's NFS. Oof.
Yeah, NFS it's okay. It can cause issues depending on the NFS implementation. Storage vendor specific. Some storage vendors are different than others, but you can encounter, what do they call it? It's read after write, I think, especially if you have multiple instances. So say I've got 3 containers, 3 registry instances running, all pointed at the same NFS PV. Maybe instance 1 writes something, but instance 2 and instance 3 haven't refreshed that and they're basically not aware that it's there. So you can either end up in a scenario where something tries to pull from the registry and it fails because it doesn't know it's there, or if like 2 writes for the same layer come in very close together, it could try and double write it, which might cause corruption. So that was always the issue with NFS. Is there any helpful? Let's see. Oh, sorry. Let me look at the first message there, Madi. Is using ACM for creating OpenShift clusters and disconnected vSphere environments supported? Yes. So essentially, you deploy ACM inside of the environment, and then you have to mirror all of the images for an OpenShift install, just like you would do any disconnected install. And then you effectively deploy it using the standard Hive ACM methodology. Let me see if I can Where's the documentation?
I'll see if I can dig some of that up really quick.
I should have tested screen sharing beforehand, but potato. Yep, I'm gonna try and share my screen here, so that way we can look at the documentation together. Why, yes, please do accept my cookies. So if we look in the documentation here and go to disconnected installation mirroring, so you can use the documentation here to create that mirror registry. And then when you go to deploy the cluster inside of ACM in your disconnected environment, you just use the image content source policy. Just if we follow all the way down here, I think, it'll output the stanza that you need to use in that install config file. And then you just provide that in with your ACM definition for the cluster. So it's a slightly drawn out process, but it's relatively straightforward. Basically, focus on this section of the documentation, right? Mirroring images for disconnected installation. And you can either, if you want to use OC Mirror, or if you want to do it the traditional way, whichever in the docs, I definitely recommend OC Mirror. Johnny, I know you do too. And then follow the ACM documentation for installing. Doing replications, might just create another PV. Yeah, that's exactly what I would recommend doing, Peter. Can we install UPI in VMware environment using ACM? So, sort of. So historically, ACM only does IPI installations, right? It uses Hive, it kicks off that automation, and it goes and it talks to the cluster and does an installation. So I don't know how far along it is, but I know that ultimately ACM's goal, along with OpenShift, is we want to use the assisted installer experience as sort of the main quote-unquote UPI experience. So I believe with ACM 2.5, we have the, what do we call them, infrastructure environments or something like that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So there's like infrastructure environments, right, where you can generate an ISO, you boot the nodes to that, and then they register in there, and then you select the nodes and say, take these 6 nodes and create a new cluster out of them. I don't know if the assisted installer, I'll call it an instance, but the assisted installer that's a part of ACM has the checkbox, has the automation to include the VMware integration. So if you just go to console.redhat.com and do the normal assisted installer install, or the software as a service hosted software as a service assisted installer install, and that's a mouthful. There is a checkbox there that you can use that says install vSphere integrated, and after it, it'll deploy with the cloud provider and everything else, and then afterwards you just go in and provide your vCenter credentials. I don't know if that's an ACM yet. If it's not, it will be, but that's sort of the goal. So the answer is yes, probably now, maybe not, but definitely in the future, is my concise answer there.
rhope9 asked a question about, really made a statement about they're having some interesting issues with the egress IP and OVN Kubernetes. It's intermittent with some of their nodes, and then basically asking if we've had any experience with this similar issue with 4.11. I personally have not. So just wanted to kick that back over to you, Andrew, and see if you had anything.
I haven't either, but usually I don't hear about those types of things until it becomes more like it. I don't often look for those things, so it has to be significant enough or commonplace enough for the field to start asking about it or posting about it. So offhand, no.
Yeah, our rhope9, if you want to send us some information on it, like via email or whatever, let us know, or shoot it over to us, and we'll try and dig into it for you.
Mm-hmm. Drinking water. My voice is scratchy from shouting. I don't know if it comes across in the audio here, but like the air handlers and when a couple thousand people end up in one room, it gets very loud. So
Right now, it's really good. I mean, nice and crisp.
Good, glad to hear it. Well, or not, or thank you for the confirmation. Yeah, but it's I'm not used to shouting. You go to conferences and you have to shout to be heard a lot of times. So. All right, so let's talk about what's going on with OpenShift on vSphere in 4.11. So there's kind of two big changes, and neither one of them was really blatantly obvious in any of the announcements or blogs or anything that we've done so far. So the first one is, if you're familiar with vSphere IPI or the IPI installation, really with any of the on-premises stuff, we use an integrated load balancer. So when you do the installation process, right, it'll ask you for the virtual IP address to use for API. It'll ask you for the virtual IP address to use for the ingress controller, right, the star.apps. And then it manages those using keep alive D. So historically, keep alive D has used multicast to find and communicate with its peers. The change with 4.11 is that has now switched to unicast. So this is a good thing for a couple of different reasons. So one, it means that we should hopefully alleviate a lot of the issues, I'll say, with conflicting VRRP IDs for the keep alive D domain. The other one, I think, I haven't tested this, but I wonder if, because it's now unicast, if now it can cross subnets. Because historically we've always had to have everything on the same broadcast domain, so that way it could use multicast and it could find its peers. So I wonder if that's changed now. It's not documented, it's not stated anywhere, but my curiosity is piqued.
I feel like that's possible, right? Because you're going literally like from source to destination. So if that destination is a router, then it should be able to get out, right?
Yeah, that's Andrew's assumption. And you know what they say about assumptions, right?
Oh yeah.
So I want to test it out. I want to try it out and see whether or not that's true, and if it is true, whether or not it's supported. Because we get asked that pretty frequently. Can I deploy worker nodes in other subnets, or folks want to distribute them around for whatever reason. So it'd be great if that is possible. So the other thing that, or the other sort of semi-significant change, and it's not really a change so much as it's now tested and documented and therefore supported. So let's share my screen again. And let's see here. I can't, so I'm on my laptop, so Johnny, I can't see both my screen and chat or anything at the same time. So
okay, I'll let you know.
Yeah, thank you. So historically, when you deploy IPI, you can't move that VIP, the virtual IP address used by star.apps or the API, nor can you change the star.apps to an external load balancer. So you could do that with OpenShift on OpenStack. You could do that with OpenShift on bare metal if you're using bare metal IPI, but you couldn't do it with vSphere. So that changed with 4.11. So if we click on this guy, and way down here at the bottom of the documentation, we now have this configuring an external load balancer section. And it walks through exactly what you need to do, right? Here is an example HA proxy configuration for setting up both cluster API as well as the ingress port 80, port 443. Configure DNS, right? So add DNS records for those, and then effectively you just change it, right? And it suddenly is using an external load balancer. So this one I think is important for a number of different reasons. One, the quote-unquote internal load balancer really isn't, right? Like we said, it's a keep alive D managed virtual IP address that was assigned to one node. And then all of that ingress traffic would pass through that one node. Whereas moving to an external load balancer, now it will truly scale out, because now that external load balancer will send traffic to however many instances of the router that we have deployed. So that's a big one to me.
That's awesome. That's a huge change. I think there's so many customers that don't want to use the Keep Alive D or the load balancer that comes out of the box with VMware, and I think that's going to be a huge change. That's a big deal.
Yeah, well, I had a conversation with someone recently because they were saying, oh, well, we have to use IPI, and we need to do this. Basically, they were doing a lot of changes or a lot of things that would be better done by UPI. Well, we can't use UPI. Well, why can't you use UPI? Well, we need auto scaling. We want to be able to use machine sets. Well, machine sets work with IPI too, or UPI rather. There's no difference between UPI and IPI once the cluster is deployed. Aside from IPI, it will already have a machine set configured as soon as the cluster is done deploying. But yeah, you can, day two with UPI, you can go in, you can create machine sets, you can provision nodes using them, you can do all that other stuff. And the inverse too. If you have an IPI provision cluster, you can go in and add nodes just like you would with UPI. Create the VM, you boot it to the worker ignition, have it join the node or join the cluster, all that other stuff. And the machine set won't manage it in that case.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we talked about this before too, where I think early on there was just a lot of maybe misinformation or just false assumptions about how it all works. So yeah, it's cool that you can actually do that and just implement it after the fact.
Yeah, I know there was a number of Red Hat folks who were already doing this process in their lab. So it's good to see now that we documented it, that we officially support it being done now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, Babuni, for the Red Hat docs, create an external load balancer for IPI. How can we move the internal load balancer details? So effectively, when you change DNS, so you have where'd my docs page go? So you have this API and apps. So when you set these to be the new load balancer IP address, effectively everything will move over to that automatically. So one thing that you'll notice isn't documented here is unconfiguring Keep Alive D and those virtual IP addresses. I don't know if that is possible or supported. So yes, it is possible. It's machine config. You just go in and remove the machine config. But what I don't know is that supported, particularly for the API VIP, because the API VIP is also used for API int, and it resolves API int using the internal core DNS. So I think you, at a minimum, have to keep the API VIP, so that way that will work. But everything else, it basically automatically moves over once you update DNS. My laptop is being very slow. It's not used to having to work so hard, because I only use it when I travel, and I don't.
What are you doing?
Why are you making me work so hard? All right, so let's take a look at this presentation. You all know, anybody who's watched the stream for a while, first, thank you, but two, I'm not a big fan of slides. We like to show things and all of that, but I have slides here. I'm going to utilize them as a crutch to kind of walk through these bullet points, and I very much want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, right? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this really a quote unquote best practice type of thing? And of course, don't hesitate to ask questions at any point in time. I think best practices are best practices because we learn them from you all. So if it doesn't make sense for you, for our audience, then it probably doesn't make sense. So second to that, reiterate, for anybody who's not watching us live, don't hesitate to reach out. Challenge me, challenge Johnny. Make us validate any claims that we make or anything like that. And if you have opinions or thoughts on what we talk about here, don't be afraid to share them, or share them. Andrew.Sullivan at redhat.com, Johnny, J-O-N-N-Y at redhat.com, all the social medias, all that other stuff. We love to get that feedback.
Yep, for sure.
Now let me find the right window here. What I said about having one screen, not enough space. All right, I need to stop sharing that window, and I need to start sharing this window. How does that look? Is that legible?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I can go into presentation mode, I guess. Let's see, presenter view. Let's see what happens here. We'll see how that goes. I don't care about that. So the first thing that we'll talk about here is sort of deployments or things that we want to do during installation, take into account maybe actions to take. So as I was just talking about, when we deploy, or basically as soon as the deployment is done, there's very little difference between IPI and UPI. IPI, really the biggest change, difference, advantage, if you will, and that's a matter of opinion, is that integrated load balancer that you can move away from day two. So UPI, if you want machine sets to be able to do auto scaling, if you want straight CSI provisioner, if you want to use NSX, right, all of those things you can do with both. You don't have to choose one or the other. One thing I do mention a lot is IPI is opinionated. It is meant to be a little bit rigid and opinionated in order to more quickly deploy the cluster and get it up and running. So it's a compromise that we make. So yeah, I have, and I don't know of other Red Hat folks who have a strong preference for one or the other. I think the default that you'll hear from most folks is to use IPI just because it's easier to get started. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with either one of them.
Yeah, we always did IPI, especially AWS or Azure or wherever, and then in GovCloud it's just kind of like if you're trying to just blanket deploy a cluster and I don't care about really anything, just do IPI.
Yeah. So as we talked about a little bit ago, assisted installer is becoming a bigger and bigger part of the installation experience. A lot of us have been recommending it since before it was even generally available because it really does make life easy. But now that it has the ability to do integrated installs, especially with VSphere, you use assisted installer if it's at all an option. You can get to it by going to, I don't think I'm logged in on this window, but basically you just go to, console.redhat.com, click the OpenShift, create a new cluster, and then there's an option to use the assisted installer. It's really easy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I already talked about the other bullet there. Day two configuration type stuff. So there's a lot of debate that goes on, with our engineering folks, with customers, with field folks who ask, why can't OpenShift, why can't Machine API or the cloud provider or whatever other integration do things like configure anti-affinity and affinity groups? So it's not that we couldn't do that, right? It's just code. We could always create something in order to do that. Usually the biggest reason why we don't do that is because of permissions. There's a lot of folks, a lot of VMware administrators. I've had conversations with several of them this week. There's a lot of VMware administrators who just don't want to give that much permissions to, what this unknown to them, right? Automation that's running inside of, OpenShift. So I would always say, if you're not also the VMware administrator or vSphere administrator, work with that team. Suggest that they create anti-affinity rules absolutely for the control plane nodes. Right, we don't want to have a single physical server fail and that result in the OpenShift cluster going down because 2 or 3 of the control plane nodes run on that one server. But you might want to configure anti-affinity for infra nodes as well. At least the ones that are running your ingress controllers, because that's where all the traffic is coming into the cluster to hit those applications. So if that goes down, now your clients, whatever is outside the cluster, can't reach whatever's in the cluster. So obviously that's bad, and the cluster may as well be down. So consider anti-affinity for infra nodes. Doesn't have to be all the infra nodes, just the ones that are running the router. But you might want to consider it for other sort of features, capabilities, etc. inside of there. I'll pick on things like metrics. Do you want to have metrics be highly available because you're using that data to do things like drive, the horizontal pod autoscaler or vertical pod autoscaler, right? All of that type of stuff. So it might be on a later slide as well, but we used to, and by used to, I mean, I think I literally said this last week on the live stream. We used to suggest to folks that you configure latency or set latency sensitivity to high for the control plane nodes. So when I was assembling this list of information, I went through and built up my big list to create this presentation and shared it with some engineering folks, and they said, we don't do that anymore, right? We don't make that recommendation. To which I said, well, why? Don't we still need to protect those resources? And what they said was that we misunderstood what that setting does and what it's intended for. So the use case is for ultra low latency type of workloads. So think VoIP. If I've got a VoIP exchange or a VoIP service running inside of that virtual machine, that's when we set that latency sensitivity to high, medium, low, so that way it gets appropriate resources. With other workloads, like the control plane, instead we want to use this sort of traditional, things like resource groups and other stuff in order to give and protect resources to those types of virtual machines. There's a later slide that talks about as well, consider things like storage IO control, network IO control to help protect that as well. And then the CSI driver. If you're running OpenShift version 4.10 or later, definitely use the CSI driver. It's way more featureful. Johnny, do you remember if we got migration working? I think migration might still be tech preview.
Yeah, I'm not 100% to be honest.
So migration, what I'm talking about there is migrating your volumes from the in-tree provisioner to the CSI provisioner. I think it's tech preview. It might be GA in 4.11, but I think it's tech preview. And I think it's supposed to GA in 4.12. So anyways, the CSI driver, volume resizing is GA now. I don't think snapshots work with the VMware driver. I'm not sure though. But yeah, to me, it just makes a lot of sense to use it. And I pointed out vSAN here. So the Red Hat CSI driver for VMware is a downstream of VMware's open source, right, CSI driver. So naturally, they integrate well with their own platform. So if you're using it with vSAN, you can define like storage policies inside of your storage classes. What the failures to tolerate is, what the cache policy. Like there's a bunch of stuff inside of there that you can surface up if you choose to. Johnny, I can't see chat, so I'm just.
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay. Let's see. So control plane considerations. I was talking about how we don't want to, or how we would have other information about protecting resources for the control plane. So this is it. SED, no secret to any of us, right? It needs low latency storage. So it doesn't matter if it's a small cluster, if it's a massive cluster, we always want to have low latency storage for SED. But the number of IOPS that it needs will scale depending on the number of objects in the cluster and how active those are. So it's a bit of a misnomer to say as the cluster grows, because it's not necessarily the number of nodes or even the number of pods, although both of those things do influence it. Instead, it's based off of things like, I can have one pod deployed and it has, 374 config maps attached to it. And that one pod is, constantly churning because maybe it's a part of a CI/CD pipeline or something. And all of those config maps are constantly churning, and that generates etcd activity, even though the workloads, the actual pod count and all that is low. The node count might be, 1. It could be a single node OpenShift in that instance. So just be aware of that. From a vSphere perspective, you can always look at the data store metrics. vSphere reports out latency for the VM as a whole. When I was a storage admin, when I worked for a storage company, I always reminded folks that a lot of times we would see, VMware metrics reporting high data store latency, but the storage was reporting low latency, right? Where's this disconnect? Well, there's this big black hole that exists in between them, also called the network, or sometimes the SAN. So if you're using IP-based storage for your vSphere environment, make friends with your network admin, because sometimes you can encounter unforeseen issues.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Johnny, how many times did you and I troubleshoot things, and it's like, oh yeah, we had this, transparent firewall running in there. I distinctly remember one. It took like 2 days of arguing with the network admins because we had, I don't know, 10 or 25 gigabit networking, and we couldn't figure out why this iSCSI LUN kept like falling over and like couldn't stay up, and why performance was so terrible. Well, it turns out they had this inline, a transparent firewall that had like 4 gigabit connections that had been trunked into it, that were LACP trunked, and they forgot about it. And it's like, no, like guys, there has to be something here. Can I just let me in the data center? I'll like trace cables if I need to. Yeah, that was a fun one.
Oh yeah. I was at a customer site, and they had the HPE Synergy stack, and apparently the way that the networking is, it's all GUI based and stuff like that. So like they were going through and they didn't set the bond up correctly. So yeah, having access to somebody that knows what they're talking about and knows like how to troubleshoot it and debug it is always beneficial. That's a great tool to have in your tool bag.
Yeah. Oops. Let's see. Moving on here. Protect control plane resources. So the third bullet really talks about that in a little more detail, but the reason why we want to protect that, especially etcd, it can have a big impact. Re-elections in particular. So if the storage gets too slow, or networking or anything like that, where it can't, etcd basically triggers a re-election, that causes it to pause while the re-election and reconvergence happens. So that can have a pretty major impact, especially in a busier cluster. And then just the thing that I was talking about before, right? Use reservations, use shares. A lot of folks, I feel like, they ignore shares. If you're in an environment that is highly overcommitted or kind of running right at that thin red line of contention, shares can make a huge difference. Bump up the number of shares that are assigned to your control plane nodes, so that way they can get an unfair amount of CPU, storage, network, whatever it happens to be able to continue running without impacting other things that are happening. It's not just for the control plane. Your applications might need that too, but do whatever's necessary there. Storage IO control is a good one. If you want to manage the IOPS and other stuff. I will say, I think I have Review Center up somewhere. Let's see here. I don't think I can share. I can't switch windows. Anyways, so if you go into vSphere and you select your virtual machine and you put like on one disk, or like you say your worker nodes, you put an IOPS limit. You prevent it from consuming more than, say, 100 or 500 or 1,000 IOPS or whatever. I think that those still apply to the entire virtual machine. It's not per disk. You can assign them per disk, but it basically sums up all of those and then applies them across all. So if I have, say, 3 disks on my virtual machine and I give each one 100 IOPS, what really happens is it gives the VM 300 IOPS and it could use 300 on the first disk or 300 on the second disk, or 50-50 200. But the reason why I bring that up is, if that's true, and I need to confirm if it's true or not still, it used to be in the definitely in the 5 days and the 6 days. I don't know if it's still true in 7, but that will also impact PVCs. So if I put an IOPS limit that applies, again, globally to all disks that are attached to my virtual machine, when that PVC gets mounted from the VMware, I should caveat that it applies to VMware PVCs. If it's provisioned from the VMware entry or CSI driver. If it's provisioned from an external storage device, you're connecting the via directly to your NetApp, Dell, EMC, whatever storage, that would be exempt. But if it's mounting a VMDK backing that PVC, it would also inherit any IOPS limit. So just be careful. Can we install and configure OADP operator for project backup restore without Rustic? I don't know. I need to learn more about OADP, but I know who to ask that question to better than me. Apologies if I butcher anybody's name. Johnny, maybe you know?
I don't know, but I'm just looking at the docs. That's what I was over here doing, just trying to look it up really quick.
Yeah.
It sounds like if you want to do a backup, that you would have to have that. But just the way I'm reading it, I could be completely wrong though. So
okay,
because you can disable it.
Yeah. RHOPE 9, I've seen some IOPS recommendations, to VSphere problem detector operator, whatever, warn if the IOPS are below guidelines. I'm sure we could do something like that, but I think in order to do that, we would have to have it do periodic tests, right, to check and validate. And if I put on my engineering hat for a moment, which is always dangerous, to me, that could cause potential issues. So let's say we've got a cluster that has 30 nodes in it, and basically the problem detector is configured to go in and say, every hour or 2 hours on each one of the nodes, go in and do an IOPS test, an FIO test, or something like that, in order to test and check that it has enough resources. So we don't know the underlying topology, so maybe kicking off those IOPS tests could impact other things that are running. If we kick them off all at the same time, it could definitely impact other things that are running. And we don't know if, are all 30 of those nodes, are they all in the same underlying data store? They're all backed by the same storage device. Are they in different storage devices? And all that type of stuff. So I think it's technically possible, but off the top of my head, I would want to think about it, and in order to really discern how could we maximize the value there. That's just my initial gut, off the top of my head reaction. I'll pause to see if you have anything, Johnny.
No, I have no value to add to that.
That's not true. Come on. Let's see here. All right, moving on. I got the voice, the big voice going on in here. Scaling. We've talked about this before here on the stream. It's been a few tens of episodes, though. I always tell folks to be deliberate in your scaling strategy for compute nodes, because, let's say that I have, say 4 or 6 or 8 physical hypervisor nodes in my vSphere cluster, and maybe my OpenShift cluster is comprised of a bunch of small VMs. My VMs are 4 CPUs and 16 gigabytes because that's the size of VM that I get from the team. Is it better to scale and go from 1 to 5 to 10 to 50 of those small VMs, or is it better to have 4 or 6 or 8, however many physical servers you have, 4 or 6 or 8 VMs that vertically scale, so they go from 4 CPUs to 8 to 16, and then as opposed. So more smaller VMs, I think, has some advantages, right? It means that from a Kubernetes perspective, we have more scheduling opportunities, a bunch of other stuff inside of there. But I also run the risk of things like, what if DRS moves half of my, OpenShift worker node VMs onto one node and that node fails? What happens if they're unevenly distributed, or maybe it's trying to auto scale and it's making a resource overcommit issue worse, something like that. I think just careful consideration needs to be done to, do I do this more smaller VMs? Do I do fewer larger VMs that are maybe tied directly to the physical hosts? How do I handle things like taking hypervisor nodes out for maintenance? If I have 6 hypervisor nodes and I go to do an update cycle in VSphere, so I put one in maintenance mode, is there, does the VSphere team have enough capacity to crunch all of that down into the remaining nodes? Or should that OpenShift node be shut down with the hypervisor and let OpenShift reschedule workload into the surviving, or the remaining nodes inside of there? I'm not recommending or suggesting or encouraging any one strategy. Just choose, think about it, choose what works best for you and what makes the most sense for you, rather than just getting laissez-faire about it.
That's really good insight too, though. You know what I mean? I mean, it's hard to say like, yes, you should absolutely do this because it's situational. Like your VMware environment might be just rock solid, the best out there. And so then it's like, okay, well, yeah, let the environment handle it. Then other times you might say, well, I just really want OpenShift to handle it. So it's good insight, and it's good like food for thought, right? Like you need to sit down and seriously consider the effects of one decision over the other, and then be able to have a way out if that decision you make ends up being the wrong one. Then you can back up and go to just a separate route, or the alternate route rather.
Yeah, and it's nice because you don't have to get it right the first time or the second time or the 10th time, right?
Exactly.
You can reconfigure the nodes and it's okay.
Yep, exactly.
RHOOP 9, yeah, problem detector saved your bacon. Yeah, it saved mine too, for a number of reasons. It's been really helpful. So I originally thought that the Splat team, who's been on the stream before, were the ones that created that, and they corrected me and pointed out that it was actually the storage folks who created it, because storage was an issue. Like PVCs wouldn't have, would move around, or it couldn't talk to them and stuff like that. So they created the problem detector to find those things, and it's just expanded the number of things that it's doing. So yeah, kudos to that team. Let's see here. Scaling. Yeah, I've talked about this before as well. The hypervisor, vCenter, vSphere, and OpenShift, the schedulers aren't aware of each other and what's going on. So I alluded to this a moment ago when I was saying that, maybe I am, the hypervisor is overcommitted and experiencing contention. OpenShift doesn't know that. It just knows that, especially if I'm using pod auto scaling or something like that, it just knows that its thresholds are being exceeded, so it needs to scale up the number of pods. So it starts scheduling more pods, and maybe those land on virtual machines that are on really highly overcommitted hosts, and it exacerbates the problem. Both the application isn't getting the performance it needs, as well as that underlying hypervisor host is now, trying even harder and, having to share, try and schedule all of that workload. You do need to be, going back to the previous slide of, be deliberate about your scaling strategy with the nodes and all that. You have to have some awareness of what's going on there as well, and whether or not it can have an adverse or accidental impact that you weren't aware of. So yeah, hotspots, conflicting behavior. OpenShift is trying to scale nodes, right? Do a machine set auto scale type operation or scale up pods, and it's thinking it's distributing them across the virtual machines, 3 or 5 or 10 virtual machines, but really all of those virtual machines are on one host. So yeah, those scenarios, going back to the whole anti-affinity thing and all that, can play a role. So this is this next bullet is one that was pointed out to me by the engineers, man, words, of like if you want to look on the VMware side, if you want to keep an eye on metrics over there, CPU ready is going to be the biggest one, like the biggest indicator of there being a performance issue. Because essentially CPU ready is when the virtual machine says, I need to run something, schedule me some CPU time, and it has to sit and wait for the hypervisor to give it that CPU time. So I think the normal rule of thumb is 5%, Johnny? It's like 5% or less CPU ready is what you want. It might even be less than that.
Yeah, I think I couldn't say. I have a decent amount of confidence with 5%, but I'm not 100%.
Yeah. So yeah, and just again reiterating that if you have things like Kita or other vertical or horizontal pod auto scaling configured, you can suddenly end up in this race condition where it's wanting to scale up the pods, so it deploys more, which exacerbates the underlying performance issues, which causes it to scale up more, which so that whole protecting resources, at least giving it some.
Yeah. Or whatever.
Yeah. So I think this is the last one. HA disaster recovery. I just realized I don't have a title on the slide. So VMware HA can return, so a node fails, physical node fails. Not a good thing, but VMware HA is an amazing thing, right? It'll return that virtual machine, power it back on, and it'll rejoin at that point. So when it rejoins is when basically the control plane will realize all of that workload, all of those pods that were on that node are no longer on that node, and then it'll reschedule all of that. So what that reschedule looks like can be different depending on what version of OpenShift you're using, as well as any configuration that you've done. So this is another important change that has happened with OpenShift. I think it was 4.11. It might have been 4.10. And that's the default scheduler profile is now lowest utilized. So if we switch over here to the docs, and we'll go with 4.10. Let's see what it says. Scheduling using scheduler profiles. Yeah, so definitely in 4.10, I'm looking at the docs for 4.10. So low node utilization, this profile provides the default scheduler behavior. So that means that it could be that all of those pods get scheduled back to the node that just rejoined after failing, but more than likely they will get distributed around a little bit. Just be aware of that. But before this, before scheduler profiles, I don't think there was any, the default config was more or less random. It would try and balance it out, I think, let me rephrase that. It wouldn't necessarily balance them out. It would schedule nodes that had available resources, but if 6 nodes all have available resources, it would more or less just pick one. Mm-hmm. Now it will go with the one that has the lowest utilization. Yeah, SRM probably won't work. I get asked this pretty frequently. So SRM can return, so SRM, Site Recovery Manager from VMware, is basically a mechanism for having a disaster recovery site. So I define on my source site, here's these 10 VMs. They are an OpenShift cluster. If something happens, I want you to restart them, from this data store connected to this network in this order at the disaster recovery site. So the reason why I say here it probably won't work is because OpenShift can't tolerate changes to that underlying infrastructure. So if if you have static IPs configured, if the network, the subnet changes, it can't tolerate that. If the DNS servers, again, static IPs change, it can't tolerate that. If you're using DHCP, then it should pick those up. But it expects the infrastructure, the networking in particular, to stay the same between those sites. So that being said, we also don't test it. So therefore, if something happened, I use SRM to restart the cluster, but it's not working, correctly, it's not something that we test, and therefore, my understanding is basically we'll do the best that we can, but ultimately, we probably have to rely on VMware to figure out what SRM, blah, 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 and all that. So, I mean, Johnny, you work in GitOps and Argo and all that stuff all day long. So my recommendation for ages has been just have a brand new cluster, right? Create a new one, have it on standby, and then use something like GitOps to redeploy the applications when things like storage have been replicated over and are available.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the last bullet just kind of reinforces exactly what I just said. So that's all I got. Additional resources, all that other stuff. So
nice job.
Yeah, it's this is a topic that folks have been asking about for a long time. We get a lot of it from even Red Hat folks, and I don't think we've ever consolidated everything into one. We had Dean on, and we've had Robbie on before, and we've talked about bits and pieces, but we've never consolidated it down.
Yeah, this is good. So real quick, I just want to follow up to a question that Babuni had about OADP and disabling Rustic. So yes, you can disable Rustic. You have to enable a feature, and I pasted the link. It's enable CSI. And then again, thanks Tiger for passing that over. And then rhope9 just asked about seeing similar things happening while testing OADP. Remove a backend or backed up namespace to restore it with OADP, which then brings back all the pods running with their deployments, which will start new pods. Is that avoidable? And I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm not even 20% sure on that.
Yeah, I'm not either. I feel like we need to bring the OADP folks on and have a bit of a deep dive into what's into that.
Yeah, dear Tiger.
I know the PM, so we can ask the PM too.
All right on.
Yeah, so our rhope9, we'll take that as a note. We'll follow up and we'll get a session scheduled on that. If you don't mind, send us an email. We'll get an answer for your question faster. But if Tiger doesn't answer, what's the best way to route non-HTTP traffic into the cluster? So there's I think two main ways, Johnny. One is node port. You expose the node ports, and you can use an external load balancer pointed at that node port to direct that traffic in. The other one would be to use something like Metal LB inside the cluster to expose those. Either one of those would work. I feel like there might be a third one that I'm missing, but it's not coming to mind at the moment.
It's node port. We already covered node port. The other one is there's also a lot. It might be deprecated now, but host port, which is pretty much you just say, hey, it's there's a difference between node and host port. I just can't remember exactly what they are, but it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think host port was the other one that I was thinking, but node port is the more common recommendation, I think. Especially on-prem, if you're deploying to VSphere or something like that, Metal LB is always a good option, in my opinion, if it's something that you can use, because it's super easy. The application team, they just create a service type load balancer, and it uses Metal LB to expose that on whatever port they need. If you're in a hyperscaler, you can do the same thing. It just uses the hyperscaler load balancer facility. So I will admit that I don't know how the hyperscalers bill for things. Just be aware that could create a new load balancer, which could be another new cost.
Yeah, I think I don't know what this. I'm not even gonna try, but I will said that host port's probably only on the node that the pod is on. Whereas all the other ones, it'll span across all the other nodes. I think you're right. I think that's the difference. Host is very specific, right? You're targeting an absolute node, and then the node port it'll span.
Yeah. Node port is useful because especially if you're using an external load balancer, you just point it at all the nodes that the pod could potentially run on, and the external load balancer just sends traffic to the active one. Right? It's basically how ingress controllers work with the external load balancer for the cluster. So, all right, well, that's all I got. I think we're starting to pick up here. I'm hearing more vacuums and seeing the Oracle booth is right across from me there. Folks are showing up, so it's another exciting day.
Nice. Well, I'm glad you're getting to go. And I did paste the link. I'm sorry if it's blasting it. or if it's shortening it. But I tried it from Twitch and it looks like it's working. So let me try YouTube. But if not, just let me know and I'll put the link out there for the CSI driver. And yeah, I'll send it to you. But no, Andrew, man, thank you for doing this. I know that it's a lot to do, especially when you're there doing all of that, and then to jump on the stream and try and do this at the same time. So, thanks for
Yeah.
you know.
Well, we were chatting beforehand, and like I'm usually pretty adaptable, but this one it's even pushing my limits, right? Of I'm sitting on here literally. This is the stool that I have.
Oh
There's
yeah,
several of them. Yeah, this thing is not comfortable at all.
no.
And it's not chaotic here, but there's a lot of stuff going on, and people walking by, and all that other stuff. So I like it, I enjoy it, but it's one of those like trying to concentrate, and then one monitor trying to share things, and I hope it went well.
It did. I think it went really well. I mean, like even as the questions were kind of funneling in, you had your presentation. I mean, I thought audio was good. Was it too distracting? I hear that guy yelling in the background. If you want to tell him to keep it down, we're recording right now. That'd be great. But no, I think everything went really well.
Good. So we've got a bunch of stuff planned for the upcoming weeks. I don't remember what next week is, but I know we did show planning all the way out through October. We've got stuff that's coming in even then, so we're probably good almost until Thanksgiving here in the U.S. at this point. So mid-November. So I feel like I should look up the list now just so that I can say that I know we've got things like one of the ones that I'm personally excited about is using the node eviction policies, the descheduler, and all that other stuff to do like optimized pod scheduling and stuff like that. So that's one that's coming up.
That's going to be awesome. Yeah.
Stephanie is on camera. What's happening here?
I showed myself on the Level Up Hour this morning. So I was just going to say supply chain software security is next week. Or software supply chain.
Stephanie comes on camera to let us know we're fired. She's like,
we fixed the glitch. Yeah,
it worked itself out.
I just want to yell cut. Reset.
So they get like the hook. Yeah.
So yeah, please like, subscribe. Do all the normal stuff. If you go to red.ht/livestream, you'll land at the landing page. That was redundant. That has our calendar and all that other stuff in there, so you can get access to that and be aware of all the stuff that we got going on. And Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this might be the last episode that we have you helping us.
No, next week.
Next week, okay. So not to spoil the surprise or anything, but Stephanie, who is our amazing producer, she's been behind the scenes for a year now, right? She's been
definitely over a year.
Yeah.
It's about March, April.
Okay.
April,
So,
June.
Yeah, so she's the one behind the scenes, as Johnny always says every episode, that keeps us on track and keeps us looking professional. But she's done an amazing job and is now taking other responsibilities inside of Red Hat, moving on to bigger and better things. I like to think we helped.
Yeah, not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily bigger and better, but.
So
a lot of customer videos to do.
Yeah. So you will be severely missed. What was the one episode where I think I filled in as producer and it was just a train wreck? So apologies to the audience after next week, where Johnny and I are gonna have a bit of a learning curve. But
but that does not have anything to do with it. I plan on getting you all right. Getting you
you can try and teach an old dog new tricks. We'll see how that goes.
It's sweet how naive you are. Well, hopefully you learned a bunch of patience from working with us. Like that's probably like the one asset you'll take away from this is like, all right, well, I can pretty much deal with anything if I've dealt with these knuckleheads. So
crazy, trust me, you guys are
real quick, we got one more question. And it was: is there any news on external secrets in the CBC sandbox, and if it will be a supported operator?
I don't know. That's a good question. That's another one where I know the product manager to ask. So if you don't mind, please send me an email or send me a tweet or something and ask that question. We'll follow up with you. very simple, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com.
Okay, and they meant CNCF. I figured
Yeah.
that's what you meant, but I didn't want to assume, so I was just like, I don't know what CBC is, so I'm just going to say it. But yeah, so it just graduated CNCF. I think it'll be, I don't want to say it'll be supported, but it'll be like all community operators, right, where it'll run on Red Hat, right?
Yeah.
But like the community would actually support it.
Yeah, I would assume the same of, an operator is an operator. It'll run inside of OpenShift. It's been a couple of months since I last heard a conversation about it, and there's this Red Hat OpenShift has a strategy around how to manage secrets. I just don't know what it is. So we can definitely chat with them and we'll get that answer. So please don't hesitate to reach out with that question. We'll get you that answer as soon as we can. All right, Joel. I gotta go to work. Yeah.
Have fun, man. Get some swag.
Yeah, our booth, I love the simplicity of Red Hat booths. You see the tower behind me, there's the mini theater and all of that. My one minor complaint is I wish we had like more padding underneath the floor, because it's standing here for, yesterday I was in here for 8 hours, and my feet and legs hurt. So,
Oh yeah. 40's the young old, right, Stephanie? I mean, like it's like
the young old.
We got old bodies.
I gotta be honest. I'm not seeing any maturity until about 45, 50.
That's fair.
Tiger, come on.
40 is
Power's
solid.
dead.
You should be solid by 40, but
Ansible Power's dead. Long live Ansible automation platform.
oh,
That's right.
oh no.
So yeah, there's I actually met several of the Ansible PMs out here this week, so that's been exciting. So all right, audience, thank you so much. Love the chat, love the questions. Thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate it. If you're not watching live, feel free to reach out. Harass me, challenge us on any assumptions made, etc. So thank you so much. Stephanie, as always, thank you for your help behind the scenes. Great to see you on camera. That's nice. And Johnny, as always, it's been a pleasure, my friends. So I'll leave you with last words.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And again, thanks for doing this while you're there, because I do understand it's a lot. So I appreciate it, and I know I hope that the viewers do too. For the viewers, make sure you like and subscribe. And Stephanie, thanks again. We'll see you next week for the last show. And then I hope everybody has a great week and weekend.
Well, not our last show.
Well, not ours, but yeah. Sorry.
Not the last. I'll be around though. Check in.
That's right.
All right. See everyone next week.
Bye.